Diaster and I died, saw my son's future, and came back to transform my life. An incredible tale of overcoming and faith. The sun was setting in Chicago when Emily Thompson parked her car in the garage of the building where she lived. Her fingers tapped nervously on the steering wheel as she tried to gather the courage to go upstairs. Ethan, her 12-year-old son, was waiting for her in the apartment with the caregiver, and she knew she had to keep her composure despite the whirlwind of emotions consuming her inside. "Ma'am, are you okay?" asked the building superintendent Joseph, noticing her hesitation. Emily forced a smile. "Yes, just a tiring day at work." But it wasn't true. That afternoon, she had discovered that Samuel, her husband of 15 years, was having an affair with Megan, her best friend, and the worst part, Megan was pregnant. As she stepped into the elevator, Emily felt the weight of the last few hours crash down on her shoulders. Megan's words still echoed in her mind. "I didn't plan this, Emily, it just happened, and now I'm pregnant. Samuel and we fell in love." The elevator stopped on the 12th floor, and Emily took a deep breath before opening the apartment. "Dada." The aroma of homemade lasagna filled her nostrils. Patricia, Ethan's caregiver, always made comforting dishes on Tuesdays. "Mom!" Ethan's cheerful voice called from the living room, where he was sitting in his wheelchair playing video games. Emily felt her heart tighten. Since the accident that left him paraplegic at the age of 8, Ethan had become her driving force, her reason to keep fighting. "Hi, sweetheart," Emily replied, kissing the top of his head. "How was your day?" "Great. I finished that science project about the solar system. Mrs. Margaret said I can present it next week." Emily smiled, genuinely this time. Dylan's resilience always surprised her. Even after the accident, he maintained a contagious optimism that brightened the darkest days. Patricia appeared at the kitchen door, drying her hands on her apron. "Emily, I made lasagna. You look tired. Would you like me to serve you a plate?" "No, thank you, Patricia. You can go home. I'll take it from here." After Patricia left, Emily sat down next to Dylan, watching him play. A sharp pain shot through her left arm, something that had been happening frequently in recent weeks, but she always ignored it, too busy with work, with Dylan, with the problems in her marriage. "Mom, where's Dad?" Dylan asked, his eyes still fixed on the screen. Emily swallowed hard. He had to work late today, sweetheart." In truth, Samuel hadn't answered her call since the afternoon, when she had confronted him about Megan. The argument had been intense, with Samuel claiming that Emily had distanced herself after Dylan's accident, that she only focused on their son and work, that they no longer had any intimacy. Emily's phone vibrated, a message from Megan. "We need to talk more about this. Samuel is here with me." Emily felt her stomach churn. The pain in her arm intensified, and she absent-mindedly massaged the spot. The walls seemed to close in around her, and memories of the last 15 years with Samuel flooded her mind. Their wedding on the beach in Miami, Dylan's birth, the nights spent talking on the porch, their plans for the future. Everything now seemed tainted by betrayal. "Mom, are you crying?" Dylan's concerned voice brought her back to reality. Emily hadn't noticed the tears streaming down her face. She quickly wiped them away, forcing another smile. "It's just fatigue, my love. Shall we have dinner? Later you can tell me more about your solar system project." As she served the lasagna, Emily felt her phone vibrate again. It was a message from her friend Claire. "Poker night at my place tonight. Come over. You need to unwind a bit." Emily looked at Ethan, who was eating enthusiastically while talking about planets and their orbits. Maybe Claire was right. Maybe she really needed a few hours away from it all. "Ethan, how about sleeping at Grandma's tonight? She always complains that she misses you. Can I bring my video game?" "Of course you can." While arranging Ethan's visit to her mother's house, Emily felt a mix of guilt and relief. Guilt for wanting a few hours of escape, and relief for finally being able to let her tears fall without having to explain herself to her son. The pain in her arm returned, stronger this time, radiating up to her shoulder. Emily ignored it again, too busy planning how she would face the coming days, how she would protect Ethan from the storm that was about to hit, how she would rebuild her life after a betrayal that not only destroyed her marriage, but also her oldest friendship. What Emily didn't know was that this poker night at Claire's house would be just the beginning of a much larger journey, a journey that would take her to the edge between life and death and forever change her perspective on love, forgiveness, and purpose. The poker table at Claire's house was surrounded by laughter and lively conversation. Emily looked at her cards without really seeing them, her mind wandering among the worries she had left at home. The pain in her left arm persisted, but the red wine in her glass helped ease the discomfort. "Emily, it's your turn," Claire called, bringing her back to the present. "Are you okay? You seem distant." Emily forced a smile, adjusting her cards. "I'm fine. I'll raise to 50. The hours passed, and Emily began to truly relax for the first time in weeks. The circle of friends gathered there didn't know about Samuel and Megan, about the pregnancy, about the betrayal. There she could pretend her life wasn't falling apart. "Does anyone want more wine?" offered Claire, standing up to fetch another bottle. That's when the doorbell rang. The sharp sound cut through the relaxed atmosphere like a knife. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine, an intuition, perhaps, that her brief escape was about to end. "Samuel!" Claire's surprised voice came from the hallway. Emily closed her eyes, her heart racing. When she opened them again, Samuel was standing in the doorway of the game room, his eyes red and glassy, betraying that he had been drinking. "Emily, we need to talk," he said, his voice choked. "Now." Silence fell over the table. Emily could feel the curious glances of her friends shifting between her and Samuel. "Samuel, this isn't the time," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "Yes, it is," he exclaimed, taking a step forward. "You don't answer my calls, you don't reply to my messages. How do you expect us to fix our situation like this?" Claire approached him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Samuel, you've been drinking. How about coming back tomorrow when you're calmer?" But Samuel ignored her, his eyes locked on Emily. "So let's go home, we need to talk." Emily felt the pain in her arm intensify, matching her rising anxiety. She looked at her cards, still spread out on the table, a pair of kings that now seemed ironically fitting to represent her marriage, once powerful, now worthless. "Fine," she finally conceded, standing up. "I'll drive." "Emily, you don't have to go," Claire protested, casting a worried glance at Samuel. "It's okay," Emily assured, grabbing her bag. "Sorry for the trouble, everyone." In the elevator, the silence between them was heavy as lead. Samuel leaned against the wall, his body swaying slightly. He was drunker than Emily had initially thought. "Did you tell them?" he asked suddenly. "About Megan?" Emily felt bile rise in her throat. "No. Unlike you, I know how to keep secrets." The comment hit Samuel like a slap. He straightened up, his eyes flashing. "You don't understand anything, Emily. Anything. Do you think it was easy for me? Watching you pull further and further away after Ethan's accident? Don't you dare use our son as an excuse for your betrayal," Emily hissed, the pain in her arm now throbbing in sync with her anger. They reached the car and Emily took the wheel. The streets of Chicago were relatively empty at that hour of the night, making the silence inside the vehicle even more oppressive. "Take off your ring," Samuel said suddenly. "What? Your wedding ring? Take it off. You don't want to be married to me anymore, so take it off." Emily gripped the steering wheel tightly. "Samuel, you're drunk. Let's just—" But before she could finish the sentence, Samuel leaned toward her, grabbing her left hand, trying to force the ring off her finger. "Samuel, stop, I'm driving." The car began to swerve on the road as Emily struggled to maintain control. The pain in her arm exploded, now radiating to her chest. Samuel kept fighting with her hand, and when Emily tried to pull away, he did. Something that would change their lives forever. His hands found her neck. "If you don't want to wear the ring, you won't wear anything." Samuel's fingers tightened, and Emily felt the air escape her lungs. The world began to darken at the edges of her vision. The pain in her chest was now unbearable. The car kept moving, but Emily could no longer make out the road ahead. Her last conscious thought was of Ethan, waiting for her at his grandmother's house, probably still playing video games, unaware that his mother was about to experience something that would change their lives forever. The first sensation was lightness. As if all the pain, fears, and worries had simply evaporated, Emily floated above the car, watching the scene below like a distant spectator, her lifeless body at the wheel, Samuel panicking as he released her. Neck, the out-of-control vehicle crashing into the guardrail of the avenue. What a strange feeling, she thought, surprised by the absence of fear. A soft, warm light began to envelop her, bringing with it a peace Emily had never experienced in life. Emily. A melodious voice called her name. It wasn't a sound her ears could hear, but something that reverberated through her entire being. Come. She let herself be guided by the light, passing through what seemed like a tunnel of pure energy. The memories of her life began to flash before her eyes. Her childhood in Colorado, Sundays at her grandmother's house, her first kiss with Samuel in college, Ethan's birth, the accident, the sleepless nights in the hospital, the physical therapy, sessions. Is this dying? Emily asked the presence she felt beside her. This is awakening, the voice replied. The tunnel opened into an infinite space of light and colors that her human eyes would never have been able to process. Emily found herself enveloped by a love so deep and unconditional that tears of pure joy sprang from her soul. But Ethan, she began, feeling for the first time a pang of concern pierce through that absolute peace. Watch, the voice instructed. Before her, as if on a cosmic movie screen, images began to form. Emily saw Ethan, older, standing before an audience. Yes, standing. He walked with ease, sharing his story of overcoming adversity. Beside him, a woman smiled with love, her wedding ring gleaming under the lights of the auditorium. The scene changed. Now Ethan was playing with two children in a garden. His children, Emily realized, her heart overflowing with emotion. He had become not just a father, but a fulfilled, happy, complete man. How? Emily asked, amazed. How did he manage to walk again? Through his strength and determination. And your love, Emily. Your son will need you for this journey. The light began to shift, gradually darkening. Emily felt herself being guided to another place, a region where peace gave way to a deep melancholy. You also need to see this, the voice explained. The environment around her was now heavy with shadows and distant lamentations. Emily saw people, or were they souls, wandering in circles, trapped in endless cycles of regret and self-punishment. Here are those who could not forgive or be forgiven, the voice explained. See how resentment and guilt keep them bound. Emily recognized in some of those souls the same hatred she was beginning to harbor for Samuel, the same bitterness that threatened to consume her after the betrayal. Forgiveness doesn't mean approval or forgetting, the voice continued. It means freeing yourself. Forgiveness is a choice we make for ourselves. The images of Ethan returned clearer now. Emily saw him in a physical therapy room, sweating, determined, taking his first steps supported by parallel bars. She saw herself beside him, encouraging, supporting, believing. Your son will achieve great things, Emily. But he will need your strength, your faith, and your unconditional love to get there. Are you ready for this mission? Before she could answer, a sharp pain shot through her chest. The spiritual world began to waver, the colors dissolving, the light fading away. No, Emily screamed. I still have so many questions. You already have all the answers within you, the voice replied, now more distant. Remember, love is the most powerful force in the universe. Use it wisely. The pain intensified. Emily felt herself being pulled back, crossing dimensions, returning to the weight and density of her physical body. Sounds began to penetrate her consciousness. Ambulance, sirens, frantic voices, someone shouting her name. She's coming back, a male voice exclaimed. Keep up the chest compressions. Emily opened her eyes, blinded by the intense lights of the ambulance. Her entire body ached, especially her chest, where the paramedics were still performing resuscitation procedures. Welcome back, one of the paramedics said, smiling behind his mask. You gave us quite a scare. She tried to speak, but her throat was on fire. She turned her head slightly and saw Samuel handcuffed, being placed in a police car. Their eyes met for a moment, and for the first time, Emily didn't feel hatred, just a deep sadness and compassion. Ethan, she managed to whisper. Your son is fine, the paramedic replied. We've already notified your family. Now we need to take you to the hospital. As the ambulance sped through the Chicago night, Emily closed her eyes, reliving every moment of her experience on the other side. The visions of Ethan walking, the feeling of unconditional love, the understanding of forgiveness. It all felt so real, so vivid. A certainty settled in her heart. Her life had changed forever. Not just because of the near-death experience, but because of the mission she now knew she had been given. Ethan would achieve great things, and she would be by his side every step of the way. The room at Mount Sinai Hospital was quiet, except for the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitors. Emily watched the light of the rising sun filter through the curtains, creating dancing patterns on the ceiling. 3 days had passed since her near-death experience, but the sensations and visions remained as vivid as the first moment. "Mom!" Ethan's voice brought her back to the present. He was in his wheelchair beside the bed, holding her hand. "Were you far away again?" Emily smiled, gently squeezing her son's hand. "Just thinking, my love." "Thinking about what happened?" Ethan asked, his eyes revealing a maturity beyond his 12 years. "Grandma told me that that he..." "Ethan," Emily interrupted softly, "sometimes the people we love make terrible mistakes, but that doesn't mean they are completely evil." The words surprised even her. Before her experience, she would have been consumed by anger and a desire for revenge. Now a new understanding had taken hold of her heart. The door to the room opened and Dr. Michelle, the cardiologist, entered, accompanied by Dr. Philip, the psychiatrist who had been called in to consult on the case. "How is our patient today?" Dr. Michelle asked, checking the monitors. "The test showed that you had a heart attack during the incident. Lucky that the ambulance arrived in time." Emily instinctively touched her neck, where the marks from Samuel's fingers were still visible. "Actually, doctor, there's something I need to tell you, something that happened while I was technically dead." Dr. Philip pulled up a chair, his interest visibly piqued. "Can you tell us?" Emily looked at Ethan, hesitant. "Sweetheart, could you wait outside with Grandma for a little while?" Ethan nodded, though reluctantly. After he left, Emily took a deep breath and began to recount her experience. The light, the feeling of absolute peace, the visions of Ethan's future, the understanding of forgiveness, every detail still crystal clear in her memory. "Near-death experiences are more common than people think," Dr. Philip commented when she finished, "but each one is unique and deeply meaningful to the person who experiences it." "Doctor," Emily hesitated, "about the visions I had, about my son walking again, is it possible that..." "Emily," Dr. Michelle intervened gently, "as a physician, I need to be realistic about Ethan's condition, his spinal cord injury." "I know," Emily interrupted her, a new strength in her voice. "I know what the tests show. I know what science says, but I also know what I saw. And more importantly, I know what I feel." The doctors exchanged concerned glances. "I'm going to research new treatments," Emily continued. "Stem cells, experimental therapies, whatever it takes. I know it sounds crazy, but I'm sure this is what I need to do." "It's not crazy," Dr. Philip replied, surprising her. "I've seen patients who went through similar experiences develop extraordinary clarity about their life purposes. The important thing is not to lose the balance between hope and reality." At that moment, a nurse hurried into the room. "Mrs. Thompson, there's a police officer who wants to speak with you about the assailant." The old Emily would have felt her heart race with anger, but now a surprising calm enveloped her. "You can let them in." An investigator entered the room, introducing herself as Deborah Martinez. "Mrs. Thompson, we need your statement and to know if you wish to proceed with the charges against your husband." Emily closed her eyes for a moment, reliving the images of souls trapped in cycles of bitterness and revenge that she had witnessed on the other side. "Yes, I will file a complaint," she finally replied. "Not out of revenge, but because Samuel needs to face the consequences of his actions in order to transform. And I need to protect myself and my son." The investigator jotted something down in her notebook. Samuel is detained and claims he doesn't remember what happened due to being drunk. He asked to see you." "Not yet," Emily responded. "First, I need to strengthen myself, and he needs to get help." After everyone left, Emily was alone with her thoughts. She picked up her phone and, for the first time in days, checked her messages. There were dozens of them, including several from Megan, begging for forgiveness. With trembling fingers, Emily typed a single message to her former friend. "We need time and space to heal. I wish peace for you and your baby." After sending the message, Emily felt as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The words, "of the presence of light," echoed in her mind. Forgiveness is a choice we make for ourselves. Ethan returned to the room, now accompanied by his grandmother. "Mom, I brought a surprise." He held up a tablet. "I found a doctor in Canada who's researching electrical stimulation for patients with spinal cord injuries. Can we look into this more?" Emily felt tears of emotion welling up in her eyes. Her son, unknowingly, was already beginning to walk the path she had envisioned. "Of course we can, my love. In fact, we have a long and incredible journey ahead of us, and you know what? I'm absolutely sure everything will turn out fine. Take a deep breath and keep your focus on the present." The serene voice of therapist. Sophia filled the softly green-toned office. It was Emily's third session since being discharged from the hospital 2 weeks ago. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm going crazy," Emily confessed, adjusting herself on the couch. "I quit my job at the bank. I'm selling my apartment and I'm planning to take Ethan for an experimental treatment on the other side of the world. All because of a vision." Sophia watched her carefully. "And how do you feel about these decisions?" "Strangely at peace," Emily replied, surprised by her own certainty. "It's like, for the first time in my life, I know exactly what I need to do." The therapist made a few notes. "Emily, near-death experiences often trigger profound changes in people's personalities and priorities. The important thing is to ensure these changes are implemented consciously and in a balanced way." Emily nodded, recalling the conversation she'd had with Ethan the night before. Her son was excited about the possibility of treatment in Canada, but also scared. "What if it doesn't work, Mom?" he had asked, his voice small in the darkness of the room. "Then we'll try another path," she had replied, kissing his forehead. "The important thing is to never give up." "I got a letter from Samuel today," Emily mentioned to Sophia, "from prison." "And do you plan to read it?" Emily pulled the crumpled envelope from her bag. "I already did. He's in a rehab program for alcoholics there. He says he's remorseful, that he can barely live with the guilt of what he did." "How did you feel reading the letter?" "Different from what I imagined. I didn't feel anger or hatred, just compassion and a certainty that I need to keep my distance so we can both heal." Sophia smiled softly. "That shows great emotional maturity, Emily." After the session, Emily drove to Mount Sinai Hospital, where she had a meeting with Dr. Richard Mendez, one of the leading spinal injury specialists in the country. The doctor had become interested in Ethan's case after reading about the Canadian treatment they were considering trying. "Dr. Thomas Morrison from the Research Center in Seattle is a colleague of mine," Dr. Richard explained, showing some articles on his computer. "His technique combines electrical stimulation of the spine with gene therapy and an intensive rehabilitation program. The preliminary results are promising." "But?" Emily asked, sensing hesitation in his voice. "But it's an experimental treatment. Expensive and with no guarantees. Plus there's a long waiting list." Emily took a deep breath. "Doctor, I sold my apartment, quit the bank where I worked for 15 years, and I'm using all my severance and savings for this. I don't care how long we have to wait or how many attempts it takes. Just tell me, can you help us get in touch?" "With Dr. Morrison?" Dr. Richard studied her for a moment before smiling. "Your determination reminds me of my own mother. She never gave up on me when the doctors said I wouldn't survive polio. I'll call Thomas today." Leaving the hospital, Emily received a message from Claire, her friend from the poker group. "I heard you're selling the apartment. Are you sure about this? Everyone's worried about you." Emily stopped at a cafe to reply. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I know it sounds crazy, but I need you to trust me." While waiting for her coffee, Emily opened her new blog, Journey of Light, where she had started sharing her experiences. To her surprise, the latest post about her near-death experience already had hundreds of comments. "Your story gave me hope," one said. "I've had a similar experience," revealed another. "Please keep sharing your journey," a third pleaded. On her way to pick up Ethan from physical therapy, Emily stopped by the real estate office. The apartment was practically sold, and she had rented a small flat for them to stay in until their trip to Seattle. "Mom!" Ethan smiled as she walked into the physical therapy clinic. "Look at this." With the help of 2 parallel bars and a lot of effort, Ethan managed to slightly move his right leg. It was a minimal movement, almost imperceptible, but to Emily it was like seeing the beginning of her visions coming to life. "His neuroplasticity is remarkable," commented Dr. Patricia, the physical therapist. "I've never seen such determination in such a young patient." In the small but cozy flat they now called their temporary home, Emily and Ethan spent the evening researching Seattle. The city that would soon be their new home looked beautiful in the photos, with its snowy mountains and blue sea. "Mom," Ethan called out as she prepared hot chocolate for them. "Do you think Dad will be able to visit us there?" Emily paused, choosing her words carefully. "When your dad finishes his treatment and is feeling better, we can talk about it. What's important now is focusing on your recovery." "You know what's strange?" Ethan continued, spinning his chair to face her. "Since that night at the hospital, you've been different. More at peace. Even with everything that happened." Emily approached, kneeling to meet her son at eye level. "It's because I realized something very important. Sometimes we need to lose everything to find our true path. And do you know what our path is now?" "What?" "It's believing in the impossible. It's turning tragedy into a miracle. It's showing the world that love is stronger than any obstacle." Ethan smiled, his eyes glistening with held-back tears. "I love you, Mom. I love you too, my love, more than you can imagine." The Canadian winter painted Seattle white as Emily and Ethan arrived in the city. Through the taxi window on their way from the airport to the small rented apartment, the two watched in awe as snowflakes danced in the air, a sight so different from the Brazilian heat they had left behind. "It looks magical," Ethan whispered, his breath fogging up the window. Emily smiled, squeezing her son's hand. After 6 months of waiting, countless emails, video calls, and preparations, they were finally there. The apartment was in a modest building in the Queen Anne neighborhood, close to the rehabilitation center where Ethan would undergo treatment. It was small but cozy, with a partial view of the mountains surrounding the city. "Home sweet home," Emily joked in English, making Ethan laugh as she opened the door. Their few suitcases and the special wheelchair they had bought for the treatment were already there, sent days earlier. "Mom," Ethan called as she organized some things in the kitchen. "Are you nervous?" Emily stopped what she was doing, considering the question. "A little, but more hopeful than nervous. And you?" "Same?" He swiveled his chair, looking around the space. What if it doesn't work?" Emily moved closer, kneeling in front of him. "Ethan, remember what we talked about. We didn't come here just for the possibility of you walking again. We came because no matter the outcome, this is our journey, our adventure." Emily's phone buzzed. It was a message from Dr. Patricia, the physical therapist from Colorado. "Have you arrived? We're all rooting for you here." As Emily replied, Ethan scrolled through his tablet, researching the rehabilitation center. "Mom, look, there's an article about Dr. Morrison. He helped 3 patients regain sensation in their legs." "That's why we're here," Emily smiled, putting her phone away. "Tomorrow we'll meet the whole team." Night fell over Seattle, and with it came heavier snow. Emily made hot chocolate for both of them, a new tradition they had developed over the past few months. Sitting by the window, mother and son watched the city lights reflected in the white flakes. "I got a letter from your dad," Emily commented, softly. "He completed the rehabilitation program in prison. His lawyer is asking for parole." Ethan fell silent for a moment, fidgeting with the mug in his hands. "Do you still hate him?" "No, son, I don't hate him. In fact, I pray for him every day. that he finds peace and purpose, just as I have. The next morning, Emily woke up before sunrise. She made some coffee and sat down to write on her blog, which now had thousands of followers. Today begins a new chapter in our journey. Seattle welcomed us with snow and hope. I look out the window and see the towering mountains, reminding me that the greatest obstacles often hide the most beautiful views. Ethan is anxious and so am I. But we carry with us the certainty that was born that night in the hospital, that love can indeed move mountains. The post was interrupted by Ethan calling from the room. "Mom, is it time yet?" Emily glanced at the clock. There were still 2 hours until the first appointment, but she understood her son's anxiety. "Almost. Want to have breakfast at the cafe around the corner? I saw they have pancakes." The Seattle Neuro Rehabilitation Center occupied a modern glass and steel building. At the reception, they were greeted by Sarah, a nurse with a British accent who quickly made Ethan feel at ease. "Dr. Morrison is eager to meet you," she remarked, guiding them through the halls. "Your case has really caught the team's attention." The center was impressive. Through large windows, Emily and Ethan could see various therapy rooms, state-of-the-art equipment, and patients at different stages of recovery. "Emily! Ethan!" Dr. Morrison greeted them at the door of his office. He was younger than Emily had imagined, with kind eyes and a warm smile. "Welcome to Seattle." Over the next hour, the doctor explained the treatment in detail. It would be a combination of electrical stimulation of the spinal cord, gene therapy for neural regeneration, and an intensive rehabilitation program. "It's important to understand that each case is unique," he emphasized. "I can't promise specific results, but I can promise we'll do everything in our power." "Will it hurt?" Ethan asked, his voice small. "Sometimes it might be uncomfortable," Dr. Morrison answered honestly, "but we have an incredible team here to support you, and your mum will always be by your side too." As Dr. Morrison showed some scans on the computer, Emily noticed a photo on his desk, him with a woman in a wheelchair. "My sister," he explained, noticing her gaze. "It was because of her that I specialized in this field. She taught me that physical limitations don't define who we are." Leaving the office, Ethan was quiet, processing all the information. Emily could sense his apprehension. "One day at a time, okay?" she said softly. Ethan nodded, then a small smile appeared on his face. "Mum, do you think, when I get better, we can go skiing in those mountains?" Emily felt her eyes fill with tears of emotion. It was the first time Ethan had said when instead of if when referring to his recovery. "Of course, sweetheart. We'll go skiing, ice skating, have snowball fights. Whatever you want. One more time, Ethan. You can do it." The firm voice of physical therapist Laura echoed through the rehabilitation room. Ethan was lying on the special table, electrodes connected along his spine, beads of sweat dripping down his face as he tried to move his toes. Emily watched from the chair in the corner, her hands unconsciously gripping the crucifix she now wore around her neck, a gift from her mother before the trip. It had been a month since the treatment began, and every small progress was celebrated as a victory. I saw it move," Ethan suddenly exclaimed, his eyes wide with emotion. Laura smiled, jotting notes on her clipboard. Yes, there was a noticeable movement in the pinky toe. The electrical stimulation is starting to create new neural connections. Emily felt silent tears stream down her face. It was a tiny movement, almost imperceptible to anyone not looking for it, but to them it represented a universe of possibilities. Back at the apartment that evening, as she prepared dinner, Emily overheard Ethan talking on a video call with his grandmother in the United States. "Grandma, I moved my toe today. It was just a little, but Laura said it's a great sign, and next week I'm starting pool therapy too." Emily smiled, recalling the visions she had during her near-death experience. Every small step forward seemed to confirm what she had witnessed in that spiritual realm. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Claire. "Emily, I need to tell you something. Megan lost the baby." Emily felt her heart tighten. Despite everything that had happened, she couldn't feel anything but compassion. She replied, "I'm so sorry for her. I'll keep her in my prayers." "Mom?" Ethan's voice brought her back to the present. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart." "How did you know it was going to work out? I mean, you sold everything, left your job, moved to another country. Weren't you scared?" Emily turned off the stove and sat down next to her son. "I was very scared. I still am sometimes. But you know that night in the hospital when my heart stopped?" Ethan nodded, his eyes attentive. "I saw something beyond this life, Ethan. Something so real, so true that it completely changed the way I see the world. And in that experience, I saw you walking, living a full and happy life. It wasn't just a dream or a hope. It was a certainty. That settled deep in my soul. What if that vision is wrong? Then it will still have been worth it, because every day of this journey has made us stronger, more united, and more aware of the true meaning of love." The phone rang. It was Dr. Morrison. "Emily, Dylan's latest tests showed increasing neural activity in the lumbar region. We want to try something new tomorrow, a combination of electrical stimulation with a new gene therapy protocol." "Any risks?" "Every experimental procedure has its risks, but the preliminary results are promising. I'd like to discuss this with you in person tomorrow morning." After hanging up, Emily updated her blog, sharing the day's news. The comments didn't take long to appear. "You are an inspiration. My son also has paralysis. Your story gives us hope. Keep believing, miracles happen." A different notification caught her attention, an email from Samuel's lawyer. "He has been granted parole. He is undergoing psychiatric treatment and attending Alcoholics Anonymous. He requests permission to send a letter to Ethan." Emily looked at her son, who was now watching TV, completely absorbed in a documentary about winter sports. She decided she would talk to him about his father's letter at the right time. The next morning, during breakfast, Ethan surprised Emily. "Mom, I wrote something for your blog. Can I post it?" The text was simple but profound. "Hi, I'm Ethan. I'm 12 years old, and I'm learning that miracles don't happen on their own. They need a lot of hard work, love, and faith. My mom taught me that sometimes we need to die a little to be reborn stronger. Yesterday, I managed to move my toe for the first time in 4 years. It was just a tiny bit, but it's a start. And you know what? Now I know I'll ski on those mountains one day. It's no longer a question of if, but when." Emily hugged her, son, their tears mingling. Outside, the snow was beginning to melt, announcing the arrival of spring, a perfect metaphor for the thaw happening in their own lives. Spring in Seattle brought more than just flowers and longer days. 3 months had passed since the start of the treatment, and the rehabilitation center was buzzing with a different energy that morning. "Unbelievable," murmured Dr. Morrison, reviewing the results of Ethan's latest tests. "The neural regeneration is progressing far beyond our expectations." Emily, sitting beside her son in the office, squeezed his hand as the doctor explained the technical details. Ethan now could move not only his toes, but had also regained some sensation in his legs. "There's one more thing," Dr. Morrison continued, a special gleam in his eyes. "We've been selected for an international neurology conference in Boston next month. We'd like Ethan to be one of the cases presented." "Me?" Ethan asked, surprised. "But why?" "Because your response to the treatment has been exceptional. The combination of electrical stimulation with the new gene therapy is producing results that could help thousands of others." Emily felt her heart race. It was exactly like in her vision. Ethan not only recovering, but his story inspiring and helping others. As they left the office, they were surprised by Laura, the physical therapist, who came running down the hallway with a radiant smile. "Ethan, it's here. The special equipment we've been waiting for has arrived." In the physical therapy room, a new device dominated the space, a state-of-the-art robotic exoskeleton specifically developed for rehabilitation. "With this," Laura explained, "we can start training walking movements while your brain re-establishes neural connections." Ethan looked fascinated at the equipment. "It looks like an Iron Man suit," he joked, making everyone laugh. Back at the apartment, Emily found unexpected mail, a letter from the United States with the logo of the hospital, where she had her near-death experience. It was from Dr. Philip, the psychiatrist who treated her that night. "Dear Emily," the letter began, "I hope this finds you well. I've been following your journey through the blog and need to share something important. Since your departure, we've started research on near-death experiences and their therapeutic implications. Your case has opened doors we didn't even know existed." The phone rang, interrupting her reading. It was Claire. "Emily, you won't believe it. Megan, she's organizing a support group for women who have experienced pregnancy loss. She says your blog inspired her to turn her pain into something positive." Emily felt a wave of emotion wash over her. How curious it was, the way the universe worked, turning tragedies into opportunities for healing and growth. "Mom," Ethan called from his room. "Can you come here for a minute?" She found him sitting on his bed, an open letter in his hands, the letter from Samuel that she had authorized to be sent. "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked softly, sitting down beside him. "He says he's different, that the treatment is helping, that he's really sorry for everything." Ethan paused, taking a deep breath. "He asks if he can come visit us when his probation is over." Emily closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the dark place she had visited during her near-death experience, where souls were trapped in cycles of guilt and regret. "What do you want, son?" "I don't know. Sometimes I miss him, but I'm also scared." "Fear is natural," Emily replied, hugging him. "But you know what I've learned? That sometimes people need to get completely lost to truly find themselves." At that moment, something extraordinary happened. Ethan, who was sitting on the edge of the bed, moved his right leg, not just his toes or an involuntary spasm, but a conscious and controlled movement. "Mom," he shouted, his eyes wide with surprise and joy. "Did you see that?" Emily couldn't hold back her tears. "I did, my love. I saw it." That night, as Ethan slept, Emily sat down to update her blog. But before she could start writing, she received an unexpected message. It was from Dr. Morrison. "Emily, sorry for the late hour, but I need to share something with you. I've been reviewing some cases similar to Ethan's in the medical literature and found something intriguing. Have you ever heard of the Lazarus effect?" The term made Emily shiver. It was what her father used to call the stories of people who came back from the dead, like Lazarus in the Bible. "In some documented cases," the message continued, "patients who have undergone near-death experiences developed an extraordinary ability to heal and recover. We're beginning to suspect that your experience and Ethan's exceptional recovery might be connected in a way that science doesn't yet fully understand." Emily looked out the window, watching the lights of Seattle reflected on the bay. She remembered the words she heard during her experience. "Love is the most powerful force in the universe." The auditorium at the Boston Convention Center was packed. Doctors, researchers, and experts from around the world had gathered for the International Neurology Congress. On stage, Dr. Morrison was presenting the results of the experimental treatment, while Emily and Ethan waited backstage. "Nervous?" Emily asked, adjusting the bow tie Ethan had insisted on wearing for the occasion. "A little," he admitted, his hands fidgeting on the wheels of his chair. "What if I can't do it?" "Then we'll try again," she smiled, kissing his forehead. "Remember what I always say? One step at a time." Dr. Morrison's voice echoed through the sound system. "And now I would like to introduce you to the patient who has revolutionized our understanding of neural regeneration and the power of the mind-body connection. Please welcome Ethan Thompson and his mother, Emily Thompson." The audience applauded as they walked onto the stage. Emily was pushing Ethan's wheelchair, but something in her heart told her this would be the last time she would need to do so. "Ethan has been with us in Seattle for 6 months," Dr. Morrison continued. "His response to the combined treatment of electrical stimulation and gene therapy has been extraordinary. But what's most intriguing is the possible connection to his mother's near-death experience." On the screen, images of Ethan's scans appeared in sequence, showing the progressive neural regeneration. Emily scanned the audience, recognizing familiar faces. Dr. Philip had traveled from the United States specifically to be there, and even Dr. Richard from Mount Sinai Hospital was present. "Today," Dr. Morrison announced, "Ethan will demonstrate something that 6 months ago would have been considered impossible by traditional medicine. It was the moment. Laura brought out the robotic exoskeleton, now smaller and more discreet than the initial model. With her help and that of a technician, Ethan was carefully fitted into the equipment. Emily clutched the crucifix around her neck, her silent prayers filling the air. In the front row, she could see Claire, who had traveled from the United States to witness this moment. Beside her, surprisingly, was Megan, her presence a silent symbol of reconciliation and healing. "Ready, Ethan?" Laura asked softly. He nodded, determination shining in his eyes. With a gentle hum, the exoskeleton activated. Emily held her breath. It was exactly like in her vision. The first step was hesitant, supported both by the equipment and his own strength. The second, firmer. On the third, something extraordinary happened. Ethan began to cry. "I can feel it, Mom," he exclaimed through tears. "I can feel my legs." The audience watched in reverent silence as Ethan took another step, and another, and another. Emily walked beside him, her own tears flowing freely. "The sensors show voluntary muscle activity," Dr. Morrison narrated, his voice choked with emotion. "What we're witnessing isn't just the exoskeleton working, it's Ethan's own body relearning how to walk." When Ethan completed his walk across the stage, the audience erupted in applause. Doctors stood up, some crying, others embracing their colleagues. It was more than a scientific breakthrough, it was the manifestation of a miracle. "This, Dr. Morrison continued as silence returned, takes us to a new frontier in medicine. Emily's near-death experience seems to have created some kind of energy field that enhanced Ethan's recovery. We're only beginning to understand the implications of this discovery." Emily stepped up to the microphone, her voice trembling slightly. "What I've learned on this journey is that miracles aren't supernatural events that happen without explanation. They are the convergence of love, faith, and science. They are the result of not giving up when everything seems impossible." Ethan took the microphone, and sometimes, he added, we need someone to believe in the impossible for us until we can believe in it ourselves. After the presentation, backstage, Emily checked her phone. There was a message from Samuel. "I watched the presentation online. Our son is a warrior just like his mother. Both of you have taught me the true meaning of strength and forgiveness." Emily smiled, putting her phone away. Ethan was surrounded by doctors and researchers, all eager to learn more about his experience. His smile lit up the room, just as it had in the vision she had on that fateful night. "Emily," Dr. Philip approached, "we need to talk about something important. We're setting up a research center in the United States, focused on the connection between near-death experiences and healing. We'd like you and Ethan to be part of it." Before she could respond, Ethan called out, "Mum, come here. I need to show you something." Emily walked over to her son, who was standing, only lightly supported by the exoskeleton. With a mischievous grin, he took a step toward her, without the help of the equipment. "Surprise!" he exclaimed, falling into her arms. Emily hugged him, feeling love overflow from her heart. It was more than a moment of victory. It was confirmation that sometimes we need to die a little for true miracles to be born. A year had passed since the presentation in Boston. The Institute for Neuroregeneration and Transcendental Experiences now occupied a modern building on the campus of Harvard University. Emily watched from her office window as Ethan, now 13, demonstrated to a group of patients the exercises that had helped him in his recovery. "The secret," she heard him say, "isn't focusing on what you've lost, but on what you can regain." Emily smiled, remembering the journey that had brought them there. After the success of the treatment in Seattle, they had accepted Dr. Phillips' invitation to help establish the first research center of its kind in Latin America. The institute combined cutting-edge rehabilitation treatments with studies on near-death experiences and their impact on patient recovery. "Emily!" Megan's voice brought her back to the present. Her old friend now coordinated the institute's psychological support program. The new group of family members is arriving for the lecture. Their reconciliation had been gradual, built on the foundations of forgiveness and mutual understanding. The loss of her baby had profoundly transformed Megan, leading her to redirect her life to help others in times of crisis. Emily picked up her notes and headed to the auditorium. On the way, she passed the physical therapy wing, where Dr. Richard was overseeing the installation of new electrical stimulation equipment, similar to the ones used in Seattle. "Ready for the lecture?" he asked with a smile. "Always," she replied. Every story shared is a seed of hope planted. The auditorium was full, family members of patients, healthcare professionals, and even some skeptics from the scientific community who had come to observe the work being done there. "Good afternoon," Emily began, her calm voice filling the space. "My name is Emily Thompson, and 2 years ago, I died for 7 minutes." A attentive silence took over the room as she shared her story, the betrayal, the violence, the near-death experience, the visions, Ethan's healing journey. But now she added new chapters, the various cases of extraordinary recovery documented by the Institute, the growing scientific evidence on the connection between transcendental experiences and physical healing. "What we have discovered here," she continued, "is that the line between science and spirituality is much thinner than we imagined. We're not just talking about faith or just about medicine. We're talking about an approach that honors the complexity of the human being in all its dimensions." After the lecture, Emily found a surprise in her office. Samuel was there, accompanied by his therapist. Since completing his probation, he had been slowly building a new relationship with Ethan, always in a supervised environment. "I came to bring the signed divorce papers," he said softly, "and also to thank you. Your ability to forgive has taught me more than years of therapy." Emily accepted the papers, feeling a deep sense of closure. "You will always be Ethan's father," she replied, "and he needs you, the new you." That evening in her apartment overlooking Central Park, Emily and Ethan celebrated with a special dinner. He had just received the news that his story would be published in one of the world's most prestigious medical journals. "Mom," Ethan called as they enjoyed dessert, "do you still have those visions you had that night?" Emily shook her head. "I didn't need them anymore, son. Reality became more extraordinary than any vision." Ethan's phone buzzed. It was a message from Sarah, a young patient at the Institute who had begun taking her first steps after years of paralysis. Emily noticed her son's shy smile as he read the message, recalling the part of her vision that showed Ethan finding love. Later, alone on the balcony, Emily updated her blog, now transformed into a portal of hope and information for thousands of people around the world. 2 years ago, a near-death experience showed me that love is the most powerful force in the universe. Today, I see this truth manifest daily in the smile of every patient who regains movement, in the courage of every family member who refuses to give up, and in the dedication of every professional who embraces the inexplicable alongside the scientific. Ethan didn't just walk again. He became a beacon of hope for others. Megan transformed her pain into purpose. Samuel found redemption through sincere remorse and genuine change. And I learned that sometimes we must traverse the deepest darkness to find our true light. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that each day is a new opportunity to witness miracles, not just the grand ones that defy science, but also the small ones that happen when we choose love over hate, forgiveness over vengeance, hope over despair. Death is not the end. Sometimes it's just the beginning of a story much greater than we could ever imagine. Emily closed her laptop and gazed at the starry sky of Chicago. Somewhere in that vast universe, she knew the light that had guided her that night was still shining, touching other lives, transforming other stories. The sound of Ethan's footsteps in the hallway made her smile. Firm, steady, miraculous steps. A constant reminder that when love is greater than fear, anything is possible.